The story of Jesus Christ is one that goes beyond time, culture, and borders, resonating with millions around the world. His teachings have sparked revolutions, reshaped societies, and given hope to countless people. However, a significant and often overlooked part of Jesus' identity has been obscured: his African heritage. While Western portrayals of Jesus typically present him as a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure, this image is far from what history, geography, and even ancient scriptures tell us about the true identity of Jesus Christ. The history of this distortion is deeply rooted in centuries of cultural and theological suppression. Challenging the common image of a white Jesus is not just a matter of questioning art or culture, it's about confronting a larger, deeply ingrained narrative that has been imposed for generations. The possibility of a black Jesus has long been hidden from public view, but it holds an essential truth that can reshape our understanding of race, faith, and identity in today's world. In a time when discussions about racial justice, inclusion, and identity are crucial, rediscovering the African roots of Jesus carries profound significance. But what does it truly mean that such an essential part of Jesus' story has been forgotten? And why is it so important to restore this part of his legacy today? To answer these questions, we must look at historical documents, consider the deliberate erasure of this history, and recognize the urgent need to reclaim the truth of who Jesus truly was. As you ponder these thoughts, make sure to subscribe to our channel and share your insights below. We want to hear your perspective. Tracing the African roots of Jesus begins with the historical and biblical records that shed light on his connections to Africa. Born in Bethlehem, within the context of Roman-occupied Judea, Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew, a figure deeply connected to a land that spanned across 3 continents: Africa, Asia, and Europe. Judea was a cultural crossroads, where many diverse peoples and cultures converged, creating a melting pot of influences. In such an environment, racial categories as we know them today were not as rigid, and ethnic diversity was more fluid. This diversity offers us a richer understanding of Jesus' African connections. One of the most striking links to Africa comes from the Gospel of Matthew. When King Herod issued a decree to kill all male infants, Jesus' family fled to Egypt for refuge. Egypt, an African land, had long been a sanctuary for Jewish people during times of persecution, such as the Babylonian exile. This escape to Egypt marks a pivotal moment in Jesus' early life, but more importantly, it highlights the strong connection between Jesus and Africa. Egypt, known for its dark-skinned inhabitants of African descent, was a place where Jesus' family could blend in without drawing attention. Had they appeared significantly different, they would have likely been noticed, but this detail suggests that Jesus and his family shared physical characteristics with the African people they encountered. The African connection to Jesus is further evidenced by early Christian art, especially in Egypt and Ethiopia. Ancient depictions of Jesus in these regions show him with dark skin, woolly hair, and distinctly African features. The Coptic Christians in Egypt, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, consistently portrayed Jesus in ways that reflected their own ethnic identity. This was not just confined to Egypt. In Ethiopia, where Christianity has been a central part of the culture since the 4th century, Jesus has always been depicted with African roots. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church holds this belief strongly to this day, shaping the faith and identity of Ethiopian Christians for centuries, presenting Jesus as a reflection of their own heritage. Another significant African figure in the life of Jesus is Simon of Cyrene, who helped Jesus carry his cross on the way to his crucifixion. Simon, a native of Cyrene, modern-day Libya, was likely a dark-skinned African man who came to Jerusalem for Passover. His involvement in this key moment in Jesus' life reinforces the deep ties between African and Jewish communities during that time. His presence in the narrative serves as a reminder of the African contributions to the story of Jesus, further challenging the European-centric depictions that have long dominated Christian imagery. These historical and biblical accounts, though they may not provide definitive proof of Jesus' African heritage, strongly challenged the long-standing Western portrayal of a white Jesus. For centuries, depictions of Jesus in Western art, from the Renaissance to modern times, have shaped our understanding of his identity, reflecting European ideals and reinforcing a narrative of Christian superiority. These images, with their fair-skinned, blue-eyed Jesus, aligned with European colonial ambitions and white dominance, ignoring the ethnic diversity of the ancient world. However, the story of a black Jesus has not been entirely lost. Across Africa and among people of African descent, the understanding of Jesus' African roots has endured, not as a theological anomaly, but as an essential part of their spiritual and cultural identity. For many, Jesus is not just a symbol of divine love and sacrifice, but a representation of their own heritage and struggles. African Christian traditions, art, and theology celebrate this connection, showing that Jesus' story is deeply intertwined with Africa's rich history. In conclusion, while the African identity of Jesus is not widely accepted in mainstream Christianity, the evidence from early Christian art, biblical accounts, and the migrations of ancient peoples suggests that Jesus' connections to Africa are profound. These connections help us reclaim a more inclusive and authentic understanding of Jesus, one that honors the diversity of the ancient world and challenges the racialized images that have shaped Christianity for centuries. By tracing these African roots, we rediscover a Jesus who belongs to all of humanity, transcending the divisions of race and ethnicity that persist in our world today. The erasure of Jesus' African identity wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate act driven by political, cultural, and theological forces. As Christianity spread through Europe, particularly during the Roman Empire and later in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the portrayal of a white Jesus became a tool for European rulers to consolidate their power and legitimize their authority. The image of a white Jesus reinforced the narrative of European supremacy, blending the story of Jesus Christ has transcended time and culture, inspiring billions and shaping societies for over 2 millennia. However, there's a hidden aspect of his identity, one that has been systematically erased from history, that demands our attention today: the African heritage of Jesus. This erasure didn't happen by accident. For centuries, Western art and religious tradition have presented Jesus as a figure with fair skin and blue eyes, a representation far removed from his true historical and geographical origins. What if the Jesus you've always known wasn't who he really was? Jesus, a man born in the ancient Middle East, lived in a world where the boundaries between Africa, Asia, and Europe were much less defined than they are today. His life, deeply embedded in a region that connected 3 continents, was a melting pot of ethnicities and cultures. It is in this context that we begin to uncover the African roots of Jesus, a story often overshadowed by centuries of cultural and theological suppression. When we challenge the image of a white Jesus, we're not simply questioning religious artwork, we're confronting the very foundations of how race, identity, and faith have been constructed throughout history. What does it mean, in a world still grappling with issues of racial justice, identity, and inclusion, to rediscover the African roots of Jesus? The answer to this question isn't just about historical accuracy, it's about recovering a crucial truth that speaks to the world's most pressing issues today. As we begin this exploration, one thing becomes clear: the erasure of Jesus' African identity wasn't just a mistake, it was a deliberate and calculated decision, tied to political and cultural forces that sought to reshape Christianity for their own purposes. The deliberate reimagining of Jesus as a white European was part of a larger agenda during the rise of European colonialism. As colonizers expanded into the Americas, they carried this image of a white Jesus with them, using it to justify the conquest, enslavement, and oppression of indigenous peoples and Africans. For the European colonizers, a white Jesus became a symbol of divine authority, a divine figure that could justify the atrocities of their imperial missions. This image, cultivated in Western religious art and reinforced by theologians, was used as a tool to promote racial hierarchies. The idea was clear: if whiteness was divinely favored, then non-white people could be oppressed with a clear moral mandate. By the time of the Protestant Reformation, the image of a white Jesus had become so embedded in Christian consciousness that questioning this portrayal was met with resistance. The Reformers, although they challenged many aspects of church doctrine and practice, did little to address the racialized nature of Jesus' image. Over centuries, this distorted image of Jesus became a cornerstone of Christian theology, influencing everything from religious practices to racial ideologies. By presenting Jesus as a white, European figure, the church and its leaders reinforced the notion that whiteness was associated with purity, divinity, and moral superiority, while those who didn't share these traits were marginalized and oppressed. This deliberate distortion had far-reaching consequences. It provided the intellectual and moral framework that supported slavery, colonization, and racial segregation. The notion that a white Jesus symbolized spiritual purity contributed directly to the justification of the exploitation of African and indigenous peoples. These racially motivated ideas were ingrained in society, shaping everything from the theology of the church to the laws of the land. Over time, this led to a world in which non-white peoples were considered inferior, and their oppression was not only justified but seen as sanctioned by divine will. Despite this centuries-long effort to erase his African heritage, the story of a black Jesus has not been entirely lost. Across Africa and among people of African descent, the truth about Jesus' connection to the African continent has endured, often as a quiet resistance against the whitewashed depictions. In African Christian communities, especially in Egypt and Ethiopia, the image of Jesus has always been one that reflects the physical and cultural characteristics of the people. Ancient Christian art from these regions depicts Jesus with dark skin, woolly hair, and distinctly African features. These depictions, though often overlooked by Western scholars, reveal a deep connection between Jesus and the African continent. The flight of Jesus' family to Egypt, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, is one of the clearest historical links between Jesus and Africa. Egypt, a place known for its African roots, was a refuge for Jesus during his early years, and this connection was never incidental. The fact that Jesus and his family were able to blend into Egyptian society suggests they likely shared physical traits with the people of the land. In fact, if they had looked significantly different, it's likely they would have attracted unwanted attention. This provides a glimpse into a very different image of Jesus, one that contrasts sharply with the pale-skinned, blue-eyed figure that dominates Western art. Moreover, the role of Simon of Cyrene, who helped Jesus carry his cross, highlights another link to Africa. Simon, who hailed from modern-day Libya, was likely a dark-skinned African man who played a pivotal role in the final moments of Jesus' life. His inclusion in the narrative isn't just a historical detail, it's a reminder of the significant African presence in the biblical story. Simon's presence in Jerusalem during Passover and his involvement in carrying Jesus' cross underscores the interconnectedness between African and Jewish communities at the time. As the Western Christian world embraced the idea of a white Jesus, it effectively erased these African connections from the narrative. The image of a white Jesus became tied to the colonial and imperial projects of European powers, reinforcing systems of racial inequality. Over time, this racialized Jesus was used to support social control, with missionaries and religious leaders presenting the white image of Jesus to indigenous and African peoples as a way to promote the idea that whiteness was synonymous with divine authority. This act of racializing Jesus contributed to the historical marginalization of non-white communities and further entrenched the racial hierarchies of the time. Today, scholars and theologians are challenging this historical distortion by revisiting ancient texts, historical records, and early Christian art. They are working to reclaim the true identity of Jesus, one that acknowledges his African roots and offers a more inclusive and accurate understanding of his life. This movement is not merely about correcting historical inaccuracies. It's about dismantling the deeply ingrained racial ideologies that have been perpetuated in the name of Christianity. By restoring Jesus' African identity, theologians are challenging the long-standing association between whiteness and divinity and promoting a vision of Christianity that is more just, inclusive, and reflective of the diverse world in which Jesus lived. For African and African-descended Christians, reclaiming the image of Black Jesus is an act of profound empowerment. For too long, the image of a white Jesus has alienated them from a version of their faith that reflects their own identity and cultural heritage. By reconnecting with the African aspects of Jesus' life, they are reclaiming a faith that honors their history and dignity. This reclamation is not just about historical justice, it's about recognizing that Jesus' message of love, equality, and justice transcends race and culture. The struggle to reclaim the image of Black Jesus is not just about history, it's about shaping the future. In a world still deeply divided by racial and social injustice, the image of Black Jesus offers a powerful symbol of resistance. For many African Americans, the image of the white Jesus has long been associated with oppression. During slavery, millions of Africans were forced to accept Christianity, not as a source of spiritual enlightenment, but as a tool of control. White Jesus became the face of their oppressors, reinforcing the idea that divine authority was tied to whiteness. Even after slavery ended, the image of the white Jesus continued to shape African American Christianity, creating a painful dissonance between the liberating message of Jesus and the image of a figure used to justify oppression. This contradiction sparked a desire to reclaim Jesus in a way that resonated with the experiences of African Americans. In recent years, movements like Black Lives Matter have highlighted the importance of reclaiming Black Jesus as a symbol of dignity, resistance, and hope for African Americans and people of color worldwide. By embracing Black Jesus, African American communities are challenging centuries of racial injustice and affirming their own identities. This reclamation is not only a call for justice but a reminder that the message of Jesus transcends racial and social boundaries, offering hope to all oppressed peoples. In this sense, Black Jesus is not just a historical figure. He is a living symbol of justice, equality, and liberation for all people. Reclaiming the Black Jesus challenges long-held narratives and invites us to reimagine Christianity as a faith that defends the oppressed and stands against all forms of injustice. The image of Jesus Christ has often been reduced to a symbol of authority, power, and purity. For centuries, Western culture has presented a white Jesus, linking his image to ideas of divinity and superiority. But what if this image is a distortion of the truth? What if the real Jesus was someone whose identity challenges deeply ingrained ideas about race, power, and justice? The story of Black Jesus is not just a question of historical representation, it's a call to examine how race, religion, and oppression have shaped the world we live in today. In recent years, movements like Black Lives Matter have brought the image of Black Jesus to the forefront, using it as a powerful symbol of resistance against state-sanctioned violence and systemic oppression. This modern-day reclamation of Black Jesus does more than simply challenge historical inaccuracies. It invites us to rethink the very foundations of justice, equality, and spiritual truth. Black Jesus is no longer confined to the past. He stands as a symbol of living resistance, of standing up against a world that still marginalizes and oppresses people of color. The parallels between the life of Jesus and the lives of people of color today are striking. Just as Jesus was subjected to violence, dehumanization, and oppression by the authorities of his time, so too are many people of color in the present day. The story of Black Jesus challenges us to confront how religion has been used to justify inequality and oppression throughout history. It asks us to reflect on how our perceptions of Jesus shape our views on race, power, and privilege. If we continue to see Jesus as a figure of divine authority who is white, what does that say about the ways that white supremacy has been woven into religious thought? How does it affect our understanding of justice and equality? But what if we were to reimagine Jesus as a person of color, an oppressed figure who lived under the brutal rule of political and religious authorities? How would that change the way we think about justice today? By reclaiming Black Jesus, we offer a new vision for the world, a vision that emphasizes solidarity with the marginalized, the oppressed, and the voiceless. Black Jesus is not just a historical figure. He is a living symbol of God's commitment to justice, liberation, and human dignity. He embodies the hope of a world where all people are seen as equal in the eyes of God, where the struggles for justice are met with solidarity, and where love, equality, and freedom reign. The relevance of Black Jesus today is undeniable. His image forces us to confront the deeply ingrained ideas about race, identity, and justice that continue to shape our world. The struggle for racial justice is not just a political one, it is deeply spiritual. It challenges the very core of our religious beliefs and practices. For far too long, Christianity has been co-opted to support systems of oppression, using the image of a white Jesus to justify everything from slavery to segregation. The whitewashed image of Jesus has been weaponized to promote racial inequality, portraying whiteness as synonymous with divinity and authority. By restoring the image of Black Jesus, we are not merely correcting a historical distortion. We are reclaiming the true essence of Christianity, a faith that stands with the oppressed, that defends the marginalized, and that calls for justice and equality for all people, regardless of race or ethnicity. This reclamation is not just about righting historical wrongs, it is about spiritual renewal. It is about embracing a faith that transcends the divisions of race, culture, and history and unites us in our shared humanity. The story of Black Jesus has been silenced for far too long, but now is the time to bring it back into the light. This forgotten narrative holds the key to understanding the fullness of Jesus' message, one that is inclusive, radical, and transformative. The erasure of Black Jesus is not just an academic issue, it is a moral imperative. To restore the African roots of Jesus, to acknowledge his identity as a Middle Eastern Jew in a multicultural, ethnically diverse world, is to confront the very systems that have perpetuated racial inequality for centuries. It is a radical act of truth-telling, one that challenges the dominance of Eurocentric narratives in art, theology, and culture. By acknowledging the African heritage of Jesus, we affirm the dignity and humanity of Black people, both historically and today. Black Jesus is a symbol of resistance to oppression, a reminder that the fight for justice is not just about politics, but about standing in solidarity with those who have been marginalized and dehumanized. Recognizing Jesus as a man of African descent forces us to confront the theological and cultural systems that have been used to justify racism, exploitation, and segregation. It compels us to examine how religious traditions have been co-opted by powers seeking to maintain their dominance and control. The image of a white Jesus was used as a tool to legitimize colonialism, slavery, and segregation. It portrayed whiteness as divine, and in doing so, it reinforced systems of oppression. Restoring Black Jesus disrupts this false narrative, reclaiming the liberating message of the gospel, a message of freedom, justice, and equality for all. By remembering Black Jesus, we remember the fullness of the faith, a vision of a just and inclusive world, where all people are seen as equal in the eyes of God. In the end, the story of Black Jesus is not just a story of history, it is a story of liberation. It challenges systems of power and offers hope to those who have been silenced. Jesus came not for the powerful, but for the marginalized, the oppressed, the poor, and those cast aside by society. He lived as an outcast, persecuted by the authorities, and stood with those who were denied their dignity and humanity. The story of Black Jesus is, at its core, a story of hope, a story of justice and liberation that transcends race, culture, and history. Remembering Black Jesus is not just about correcting the past, it is about shaping the future. It is about reclaiming the radical love, justice, and compassion that Jesus embodied. It is about embracing a faith that unites us across racial, ethnic, and cultural divides, a faith that calls us to create a more just and equitable world for all. Through the reclamation of Black Jesus, we are not merely looking back, We are being invited to create a future where justice, equality, and solidarity reign.